everybody hear me fine? Good, good, good. Well, my name is Pastor D. Sandall. I am a volunteer with the Conference of Addiction and Faith, and I'm also an alcoholic with sobriety of January 1st, 1974. So I've been around a couple of years, as is Barry, who is our speaker today. And so I welcome all of you here today. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Lord, we come from different places and we're all seeking different things. And we just ask you that we may help each other find those things and to fill the needs so that we may all go on to continue to grow and seek your direction and your life-giving health. We ask you to be with us today as we continue on this journey. Amen. Well, today we are going to hear from, you saw the screen up there, and we're going to hear from Barry Lehman on mastering recovery. Now, Barry is not only a counselor in addiction for over 30 years, he's a pastor with masters in that, and he's licensed. He wants to share with us today about continuing growth in our life as people in recovery, to be mindful of opportunities and barriers, and the role of living our core principles in all that we do. I know personally I continue to always want to do that. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Barry now.
Thank you, Dee. Just the way you described that, it's clear that there's a lot to cover here over these 4 weeks. I wrote this book a couple of years ago that is called Mastering Recovery. Let me get my PowerPoint up here, and we'll go back to the start. And see, there you see the picture of it again. I'm not going to show a lot of PowerPoint slides because this book is so full and there's so much about long-term recovery. That's what this book is about. One of the problems with books and stuff out there on recovery is most of it spends a lot of time, and rightly so, dealing with the first 2 years of recovery. How do you get sober? How do you get it started? What do you look for? What do you do here and there? There's very little out there available on long-term recovery. So when I've been working in the field, working in primary treatment for 30 years, sober myself since the end of October 1988, mere youngster there, Dee, compared to you. So I put this book together, and I worked real hard to make sure that no more than 15% of the book, I'm a little OCD at times, 15% of the book is about the first 2 years. That's just to get it started. In the beginning of the book, it says, if you're new in recovery, you're in the first 2 years, don't go digging too deeply into this book. You're going to get confused. You're going to try and jump ahead too quickly. This is a serious disease, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. What you see on the screen here is the table of contents, basically, for the book. Part 1 is the basics of the first 2 years. Talk about them today. Part 2, which we do next week, will be mastery, the idea of mastery, which is a process of getting better at something that's important to you. And there's actually 5 chapters in the book on that: motivation and change, autonomy, flow, creativity, and bringing it together. That sounds like a lot next week. We're going to cover the basics of mastery next week. And then how do you live it? And that's where vulnerability and balance come in. That's part 3. And part 4 is building on the basics. Chapter 10, the beginner's mind, principles and tools and one final word. That's the whole concept of what we're doing over these weeks. What I'm going to try and do each week is start off with a basic, and this week it's going to be reviewing the disease concept, the first 2 years. Two things about the beginning, and please put questions, by the way, in the chat. We'll be breaking regularly here from the sections to take questions and to do discussion. Want to make sure of several things. First of all, acknowledgement that there is a thing called the disease concept. I think that's important to long-term recovery. That is not a new idea. The disease concept goes all the way back. Well, in AA, it goes all the way back to Bill W. It goes back to the idea of that there is a disease. There's a chapter, the doctor's opinion, that talks about this. But in reality, the idea that alcoholism or addiction is a disease goes all the way back to a gentleman, a doctor named from Philadelphia named Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush, if any of you are trivia buffs and or from Pennsylvania, you know that Benjamin Rush was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. That's how long ago the idea of the disease concept started officially in this country. A lot of ups and downs with that. It became a moral issue pretty quickly. And by the end of the 1800s, the whole disease concept was forgotten by many people until along came Bill W. and AA. In that, there's a level of things called personal responsibility and acceptance. We're going to talk about that today. The foundational aspects of the disease and recognizing the early stages of recovery. That's where we're at today. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to do a quick review here of the disease concept. But as we begin that, I want you first to think about, when did you first begin to understand that this is a disease? Some of us may have been that right from the beginning. Some of us may have taken time to do it. The whole issue of stigma in recovery comes from the fact that many people believe it's not a disease, that it has a lot to do with who we are as individuals, and that it's a moral failing. Interesting stuff. I could go on for a long time about that, but we're not. So, what is addiction? Think about your being aware of addiction, alcoholism, take your pick. Addiction, and this is from the Society of Addiction Medicine, ASAM. Addiction, there's a lot of stuff in this. It's treatable chronic medical disease with complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and an individual's life experiences. People with addiction use substances or engage in behaviors that become compulsive and often continue despite harmful consequences. Prevention efforts and treatment approaches for addiction are generally as successful as those for other chronic diseases. A lot there to unpack. I unpack it some in the book. We don't need to go into a lot of time on that. It's treatable, it's chronic. There's all kinds of things woven together, the brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and individuals' life experiences. Not to mention also the fact that many of these substances that we talk about actually change how the brain works. They make actual physical changes in the brain. They rewire the brain, they hijack it. And that's one of the reasons why people continue to do things that are harmful. It isn't just true for addiction, it's true for diabetes being one of the most common of the other diseases, that people do things and convince themselves that everything's fine. Important to note for what we do in recovery is that prevention and treatment are generally as successful as those for other chronic diseases. Some chronic diseases have a lot worse success than than addiction does. Some forms of cancer, for example, relapse far more regularly than addiction does. And yet, because addiction seems to be a personal thing, and that's where the stigma comes back in, people who quote unquote relapse tend to have a stigma attached to them. We're working real hard in the world of treatment to get rid of some of that language. I try to remember regularly to say that the person does not relapse, the disease relapses. That's a huge shift in thinking. When did you relapse? No. When did your disease relapse? You don't ask a person whose cancer returns, when did you relapse? You ask, when did the disease relapse? Very important, very important. And we'll get into how we know that that's possible in a minute. A number of things make this significant for long-term recovery that we're talking about. It is chronic, but it's treatable. Yes, there are things that happen to the brain that physically rewire it, hijack it. Our brain is one of the most incredible creations in that the brain can heal itself. It's called neuroplasticity. If we didn't have that ability, a person who has a stroke and that part of the brain is damaged and killed, that causes walking, that person would never be able to walk again. All the rehab in the world wouldn't get them to walk again if the brain wasn't able to build a workaround. That's what neuroplasticity is. Same with speech or any of those. Anytime there's damage to the brain, there are ways that the brain can, depending on how severe it is, turn things around, find workarounds. Unfortunately, sometimes the disease and or the trauma is so great that doesn't happen. And in advanced cases of substance use disorder, that's what we see happen. The other piece is that we have discovered over the past 30 years since I've been in treatment, the depth of how much community and spirituality play, spirituality in all kinds of forms, how deep they are involved in recovery and in the disease. Yes, it's not new, but we're learning all kinds of ways, thanks to many, many years of research we have now that were not available years ago. A lot is involved in that, and we get into some of that in a later time. Let me go back here. And comments, any thoughts on that? Give me some questions. If you have any, you can unmute yourself. When did you first understand? How do you understand the idea of the disease of substance use disorder?
Oh, hello.
Karen.
Hi, Karen Rubenstein, alcoholic, sober 4 years. Now, I love everything that you're saying. And I just, it's so funny because with me, like I can only go by my story and my feelings, but I do a lot of reading and research and trying to wrap my head around like why it happened, how it happened, trying to help others like with whatever I'm learning. So on that note, I really was fine with calling it a disease, and I hate to throw that in the wayside, and I'm not going to because I think it is very helpful. My question is, I've been reading Gabor Mate, The Realm of Hungry Ghosts, and then Johann Hari, Chasing the Scream, which is really wonderful.
Yeah.
And they really discuss more the sociological and psychological aspects and less of a disease. So it gets confusing because there's so many different things out there. So I guess my question is like, if I was reading your book like a month ago, I'd be like, yeah, of course it's the disease. But I've never been like, to tell you the truth, I question, is it, then I question, is it genetic? I question everything because it doesn't seem easy to find like really like the true medical tests or anything like the facts. So I just wondered if you could steer me towards some more reading with the medical tests and stuff, because I'm not sure if I'm really grasping. I don't, and to tell you the truth, the genetic one I really don't get because I know it doesn't run in the family, and I'm not really quite certain about that. So I know I just said a lot, but I'm just questioning, like there's so many different views.
Well, well, you've only scratched the surface of the many different views. Yeah, it's a tough one. Why is it a disease is made up of symptoms that has an impact on our body. It has an impact on particular organs. And my mind just went blank. There's a video available on YouTube, and my mind is blank. I've shown it a number of times in treatment. I will find it, and if I later will get it out to you. But it's very clear that certain things happen when you have this thing called a substance use disorder. The symptoms include, all the stuff that doctors will talk to you about, drinking more than you want to, with eventually withdrawal symptoms, things like that. There is something physical involved in substance use disorder. What we don't understand as well as we could is what are the natural chemicals that are impacted, that are in your brain, that are changed because of the use of substances or because of experiences. This is called epigenetics. The change in how we do things can be very significant based on habit, based on all the things. We don't understand our brain nearly as much as we think we do, and it's a real tough one. It's very tough. I like to liken where we're at in this concept of the disease with where cancer treatment was back in the 1960s. We are that primitive still, because in the 60s, cancer was seen as a moral disease by many people. There was hardly anything that could be done for people with cancer, except you say, "Well, I'm sorry."
But that whole moral piece, I mean, it is tied into the concept of free will, because that's about choice, and so I mean, there's good news maybe that the disease relapses instead of the person making a choice. And you got my drift. I can quit talking.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And when I make that point, like in treatment, people have that same kind of aha moment that you're talking about. Because wait a minute. And where I got that from literally was from a book on cancer called The Emperor of All Maladies, a magnificent book, one book, National Book Award and Pulitzer, I think. As I was listening to it as I was traveling a number of years ago, and every time he talked about the disease returning, he used the word relapse. And I said, "Oh, wait a minute, that's my word. That's my field. That's not cancer." And he kept using it, and so I did a lot of digging, and I found, yeah, that's the word to use for when a cancer returns. It's the relapse of the disease, and we keep talking about it as if it's something that I have a choice in. And yeah, there is a point where there's a choice, but I do also know that how the brain works is that you have up here in the front, the prefrontal cortex that makes those decisions that we call free will. But they are often triggered by midbrain, that is, keeps things going, like, and the reptilian brain, it keeps things like breathing. Minor things like that, breathing and the stomach doing its job with food and on and on. The most common way we see that happen is and the midbrain is impacted about 1/10 to 2/10 of a second before the prefrontal cortex, which is a long time when you got a truck aiming at you from the street at 50 miles an hour and gives you enough time to jump out of the way. You do not make that decision. That is not a free will decision to jump out of the way. You don't have time to make that decision. We think we do because it all happens so quickly within our brain, but it's actually the survival mechanism of the midbrain saying, you've got to get out of the way or that truck's going to kill you. So that's where the idea of free will, we do have choices, but when our brain is hijacked, and we can see how that happens in a lot of different ways with substance use.
Might move.
Anybody else? Oh, go ahead, Bob.
No, I just said thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, let me go back to the PowerPoint and move on to recovery. Let's define recovery. We have a disease here, which is an impact on the brain. In this case, the organ being impacted is the brain. Eventually, it has other things happen to it, can have other things happen to it. One of the most common, obviously, being cirrhosis of the liver and things like that. Addiction is a primary disease. It is not caused necessarily by anything else. Cirrhosis of the liver is often caused by something else. It's not a primary disease in the same way that addiction is. So how do we treat? Well, the treatment is one aspect. Well, where are we going with this? How do we go about this? What is recovery? And this is from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Recovery is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, there's the free will piece, and strive to reach their full potential. That's recovery. Now, we can obviously use this to talk about recovery from surgery and all other kinds of things. But since this Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services group put it together, this is the process that we look at in recovery. For want of a better phrase, every major, healthy, successful recovery program does this. I can think off the top of my head, I've done a lot of thinking about this as well. I know of no program of recovery that doesn't do this. Now, there may be, but I would challenge the idea that they're successful or healthy if they don't do this. And some of it happens in the first 2 years, the process of change, and we're going to talk about that more next week. Improving health and wellness, that's the whole purpose of the first 2 years, and that comes through abstinence from using the substance. It comes from the healing of all kinds of trauma, both physical and mental, that's been happening as a result of the disease. We learn how to make decisions. We learn how to make healthy decisions. We have guidelines and tools, whether for those in the 12-step programs, the steps, whether those in recovery, like in SMART, which uses cognitive behavioral therapy, groups like Celebrate Recovery, and some of the other religion-based recovery programs, some of which are 12-step based, reaching their full potential through higher power. These are all found in all healthy recovery programs. And the Department of Health and Human Services puts 4 major dimensions in this. And again, you'll find this in all of them: health, home, a sense of purpose, and community. That's what supports a life in recovery. We call that today, the word that's being used is recovery capital. It's what you're investing in your life and how you use it. But that's a whole course in itself, how you develop recovery capital. But that's what happens in any recovery program. So the principles, and this comes from the same sources, and this is what we build, especially in those first 2 years. It emerges from hope and is person-driven. It's about me. we've often used to say it's okay to be selfish in early recovery. And I still believe that, because this disease really messes things up royally in us and around us and through us and all kinds of things. We have to look at ourselves first. Sometimes that's driven by how we've been treating others, but it still looks at us. What do I need to do? This recovery recurs through many pathways. It isn't just one, and it is holistic. It's all encompassing. I use the word lifestyle often to describe it. It's supported by peers and allies through relationship and social networks, whether it's church-based, whether it's 12-step community-based, whether it's therapy-based, social networking, recovery capital. This is one that we're not real good at, but it has some good history. Recovery is culturally based and influenced, and is based on respect. I had a friend who was a Buddhist who we talked about one day. I said, well, how do you understand the Lord's Prayer that many 12-step meetings end with? And he was a 12-stepper. He says, well, it took me a couple of years. He says, because it's not part of his culture. It's not part of how he understands a relationship with a higher power. And so what he did was he just stood and listened to it. He didn't repeat it. It didn't become a prayer for him. And he found in that the source of how that would apply for him, what that prayer was about. It is culturally based, and it's great work has been done among Native people, indigenous populations in the United States and Canada particularly. There's some good work being done among Muslims and people from other cultures that's real important. And then it's supported, and this is a major part of those first 2 years, by addressing trauma. We are only beginning to understand how deep the problem of trauma is in many people. And that addressing of trauma, and Van der Kolk's book on the body knows the price, whatever. I have different ways of describing it. Fantastic book. It involves the individual, family, community, strength, and responsibility. I have a hunch that many people over the years experienced relapse because trauma has also negatively impacted their brain in ways that have enhanced the substance use disorder, which is why it's been so difficult. And I think trauma awareness is essential to the ongoing recovery. There's a lot in this, and we're not going to deal with the specifics of those first 2 years. I don't want to do that. There's a lot of good books out there that talk about it, among which is, of course, this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous. So I don't want to. We're not shortchanging any of that. And how did you take that and move from it? That's where the next 3 weeks go. But these are the basic principles of recovery. So, what do you think? When I asked the first question about the disease. Now, this question is, in your experience, watching people, knowing people, or in your own experience as a person in recovery, what do you see here that says, aha, that is really what I'm talking about? Beth, you asked a question. The body keeps us score. Yes, thanks, Karen. Sometimes I don't think well on my feet.
Oh, is it okay to respond or no?
Yeah, the SAMHSA, the resource on guiding principles is from a group called DADAC, the National Association of Addiction Professionals. NAADAC, the Association for Addiction Professionals. That's where that came from. Sorry, I went past that too quickly and when I put that slide together. Any thoughts, comments on this recovery process?
Sure. Hi,
Sure.
Karen again. The
Yep,
recovery for
Karen.
me, it really started with humility first.
Hmm.
So, and then hope, because I was hopeless for so long. But what resonated too is addressing the trauma. And I don't know if that's like a newer thing, but like that interests me because I had PTSD. I went through severe trauma as a childhood. I went through a lot of stuff. Finally, I just waved the white flag and disappeared into a bottle. So for me, it was just a way of escaping all the pain. So that was psychological. But again, like I ended up hopeless. So hope was super important for recovery.
It's essential.
Yeah.
And that's the second and third step of AA. Came to believe that it isn't hopeless, helpless. I tell my patients and I'm still working part-time, but in some of my lectures, I talk about when they entered treatment, they had just finished steps 1, 2, and 3, probably for the first time. Step 1, they discovered they were powerless. Whatever that may mean for them, life was unmanageable, and it may have been caused by that kind state trooper who pulled them over for speeding or whatever. Then they had to make a decision. Can I do something about it? Or is it helpless and hopeless? So they did some research. And so they came to believe that there's something out there that could help them get through this, could restore the sanity. And then, with more research, they did some digging and said, oh, in my case, this particular treatment center you're in, where I work, Mayo Clinic, okay, yeah, they looks like they can do something for me. So for the next 30 days, I'm going to allow Mayo Clinic to be my higher power and guide me into recovery. Steps 1, 2, and 3. And obviously, that's not the last time they're going to do that. I went through that myself at 3 years when I was wrestling with not whether God could restore me to sanity, but why would God even bother to want to restore me to sanity? And so I went back and said, well, maybe. And then I realized, as in the wise wisdom of early recovery, that you go back and work the step before it. And that became looking at step 1 again. As I was looking at that, I realized I was telling God what God could or couldn't do. And that sure ain't powerlessness. So that was 3 years into recovery when I finally worked that in a way that worked. So yeah, we do that. We do that every day, and that's where long-term recovery, I think, needs to have a new not a new understanding, but a new focus, a new opportunity. That yeah, I'm a 12-stepper. I always have been. But not as a counselor. I'm also a cognitive behavioral and all those others. They're powerful, but I think it all works together. And to just say all you got to do is work steps 1, 2, and 3 today, and you're going to make it, is often true. But what does that mean when I'm 50 instead of 30? What does it mean now for me at age 75 instead of 40 when I got sober? My world is different. Well, that's so true, but not my own personal world is different. And that's where I think mastery and long-term recovery become a way, a process. It's not a new program. Mastery mastery is a process of getting better at something important. I learned mastery by being a trumpet player. When I did some relearning and I'll talk about that next week. And I then began to apply it to what we're doing here. And so, yeah, mastery is a process that works with absolutely any good, healthy recovery. It probably works with unhealthy ones too. It makes you more unhealthy. but it works with any healthy program as well. Hmm. Yeah, I got a message here from Ed, but I wanted to comment. I don't know, I don't remember sometimes how Zoom always works, but it seems to me that sometimes if something was posted before you came on, it doesn't show up on the chat when you come on. Is that probably still true? I don't know whether it is or not. But going back, SAMHSA, the guiding principles came from the SAMHSA was part of what it was on the slide. Guiding principles came from NADAC, the National Association of Alcohol and Drug Professionals. And I put this on earlier, I think I did, but I have a newsletter that goes out every week. It's free. I don't believe in spam other than what we make here in southern Minnesota. And you can unsubscribe at any time, but I've been doing this for 2.5 years now. I'm well into the third year of a weekly newsletter. So if you want to go there and sign up for that, please feel free to do so. I think that's all on that part. Any more thoughts or questions on this? This is the process of recovery. This is what happens over the first 2 years. The first step, powerlessness. I try to get away from the word step because I don't want to, this is not an AA step. The first phase, the first part of the process, you stay abstinent. That's number one. I'm a believer that if you truly have a substance use disorder, you must stay away from that substance. Those who do not have a substance use disorder may not have to, but I wouldn't think about that. I don't think that works very well. Abstinent so that the brain can begin to heal. Once that healing begins, you begin to move into what can be called sobriety. It's a mindset. That's an approach to what you're living. What sobriety does, it expands that and allows you to find broader and deeper experiences of freedom and hope. What happens? Recovery thinking begins to happen. We begin to think recovery. What can I do today? Every one of my patients over the past 10 or 12 years has heard me say this more than once. What is the one thing I can do today to improve just today, to improve my recovery for tomorrow? Just one thing a day. That's all you got to do. That's recovery thinking. And that, jumping ahead, that's where inventory comes in. That's where goal setting comes in. That's where support groups comes in. That's where the practice of sobriety and recovery comes in. It's just building the habit of recovery thinking. As a result, a person develops self-awareness and rediscovers a set of values that we have either previously ignored and usually violated. This brings a sense of self, gives us a sense of who we are. And if we have a religious background, for example, that's often based on our religious training, our spiritual understanding. And that sense of self spurs further experiences of recovery. Because as I said, I have to find ways to apply what I learned 30 years ago to a life that I'm living today in a lot of different ways. And that's one of the problems I think many of us, myself included, faced with the pandemic. We never had anything like that in our recovery period. We haven't had anything like that in our country for 100 years. How could we have the ability? And then That leads to a sense of purpose and direction. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. That's the starting point of purpose and direction in recovery. Life begins to move on a new and completely different path. It's a lifestyle of recovery. And that's the first 2 years right there. That's what we learn, that's what we build, and then we get into long-term recovery. I don't like using the term mastery with people new in recovery, because I know that I, for one, and many people I know would say, well, if that's all it takes is to become a master at recovery, I can get that done in the next 3 weeks. When in reality, it takes a couple of years to get through all that stuff that's happened before. So that's one of the reasons why I say don't work on this book until you have a foundation. There's plenty of excellent books out there, which will lead into next week, chapters 3 to 7. That's a lot of stuff. I'm going to skim it next week. If you don't have the book, a quick word that you can go to Amazon, and the book is on sale today and tomorrow, I think, for $1.99. Not the hard copy, but the they don't allow me to sell it for $1.99 on a hard copy. But the ebook is on sale for the next couple of days at a lower price on a countdown deal. So if you want to go there and look at it, you can do that. But that's where we're going to go next week. And there again is that email, or not the email, the sign up. What do you think? Where does this make sense to you? Where do you? And I'm open to saying to somebody saying you're full of crap, because this is what worked for me, and it should work for everybody. I don't believe that, but if you want to share how that's true, please feel free to do so. I'll disagree with you, but maybe you'll name, because I think what I'm talking about here is a process. It's not about the program. It's not about the specifics. And my guess is that the idea of mastery and developing recovery is important enough that it can't just be only one thing. There's too many people. You can't, for those of us who are introverts, that extrovert at every AA meeting who insists we talk and act like they do, is going to drive us crazy. And because that isn't how recovery is built. That may be how it's built for them, but so on. And I love discussing it. I'm going to shut up and answer questions, make comments.
I have a quick comment, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
This is Doris. Now, I've been in recovery since October the 31st of 1986.
Okay.
And I enter every meeting that I still attend as if I'm going for the first time.
Yep.
I walk in those doors and those feelings come back, not in a bad way, but I can see myself in so many of those people that are sitting there. And I've had new people ask me, with so many years, why do you still attend these meetings? Because every new person that comes in there is still teaching me something. I learn from every person that, as a newcomer, or every person that has time as I do or more than I do. And it's always a learning experience for me. I take my little notepad and I take little notes. I carry my book with me, because there's, out of every person in that, there's always something to learn. I don't care how long you've been in the program. And when you stop learning, is when you're going to start to have problems. I think that's my personal opinion. If you stop learning from the new people and just become so self-absorbed in your own amount of sobriety, you're going to lose the whole point of the program.
Amen. I agree 100%.
So I thank you for this, because it brings me back to where I was. I'm humbled, and I'm still hopeful because, none of us are guaranteed anything, but I'm grateful. So I thank you for your book, and I thank you for this as well.
You're welcome. Karen, go for it.
I guess I'm the extrovert that annoys everybody in AA meetings.
No, that's okay. Not at all. I depend on you extroverts.
No, honestly, I'm sitting here, and one of the takes on what I love is and it is how I feel. I don't really care if it's a disease or not. I don't care if it's genetic or not. I just love what you had said. It's treatable. And that's the thing that really is thrilling to me. And you know, I don't know. And the thing is, I don't want to tamper with it personally because there were a couple of things that I've learned in AA, like that story of that guy that he didn't drink for years. He was like, I'm just not going to drink. And he picked up and he went from 0 to 100 and was dead in 4 years. So it is progressive. There's something, I have a healthy fear of, I know now the biggest thing I learned initially was I can never drink again once a cucumber becomes a pickle. And as for a disease, I always did feel like there were certain points in time, maybe self-will or stopping if I had like tools for living at certain areas, maybe I would have stopped before I really affected my brain. But now I really know I crossed a threshold that for me,
Right.
like I just really feel like, and that's why and I'm very comfortable with I never have to drink again. That's okay. Like why risk it? Anyway, so my biggest thing was I just love like the hope with disease or not, genetics or not, whatever, treatable. And so I thank you. I can't wait to read the rest of the book. I just really started, so.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. Yeah. And Tim commented in the chat that it's also other addictions that are not necessarily substance use. The process that we're talking about of recovery, and we'll see this when I talk next week a little bit about my trumpet playing and mastery. That mastery applies to how we live our lives, and that's where it became famous. The whole idea from a number of different sources, and it's exciting. And as we improve our way of living, mastery begins to become part of who we are, and we get better at what's important to us. We improve our lives. We have the option to improve our lives. If I believe that for example, I need the help of a higher power, who I would choose to call God, to help me with that, great. The process of mastery, I'm working on a process of mastery that we can use to grow our spiritual lives. How do we find new and interesting and exciting ways that may take us another step further into spirituality? It applies to all of it, just as it applies to recovery and playing my trumpet. And I hope people get that out of it. Dee, go ahead.
One thing I just heard recently too is that we all have memories, and the memories that got us in trouble, that got us drinking, are still there, and they can't be eradicated. So we will always have those concepts and memories, and it's like they're like an elephant. We're never going to forget them, and that's the stuff that got us drinking. And so we are not going to be able to get over it. We can master a lot of tools and put them in our toolbox and to keep on going. But
the body,
yeah.
The body keeps the score. Yep.
Yep. Yep.
That's
Somebody
what we're talking
posted
about.
that earlier. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that was posted again. Then yeah.
Yep.
And Ed just posted, if you are interested in making any donation, he posted the PayPal button in the chat to help help CAF continue its ministry and mission.
Mhm.
Any last thoughts or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you. Wait till see where we go next week.
I'm sorry I missed most of it. I had it written down for 1 o'clock instead of,
Okay.
now I will be here next week.
Okay. Well, there'll
Next
be a
week is the
replay.
exciting stuff and learning more about, we learned
Yeah.
the first 2 years. Now we want the good stuff, so we're looking forward to next week and
Thank you, Dee.
learning more of that material. And
All right.
our conference this year will be online. We will just be doing Zoom and online so that we can have our interactions much like this. And but there'll be multiple things over 3 days, and so we're excited for all of that. We have webinars going on every month. Please check with the addictionandfaith.com site, and that we have book studies, we have the webinars, we have all kinds of stories that are on there and linked to it. So please check out the website and all of the other things. If you're not on our mailing list, that's a place where you can also get on the mailing list. And so one of the events that are coming up soon is April 24th. We'll have a webinar with Roseanne Ford. So we're looking forward to that one also. But we're on to Barry again next week at 12 o'clock. I know that Barry and I were a little confused for a little bit there too. So any other comments or questions before we close today?
I see it's being recorded, so I'll be able to watch what I missed. I'll be back, so I'm glad.
Very good.
Oh, Reverend, where can you see the recording since it's taped?
On the conference, you could find it.
Okay.
On the
Yeah.
app.
Yeah.
Be on the
Thank you.
app.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Barry,
Take
any
care,
last
everybody.
words?
No, I'm maybe read the promise. Go to page whichever it is, 81, 82, whatever they are. I always forget.
I just printed them because I said,
Yeah.
geez, these are so cool. We got to remember what they are,
Remember the promises,
Yes.
and we'll be amazed before we're halfway through.
Amen.
All right.
See you all next week.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.